Hi everyone, Chris from BattleGoat Studios. Today's video is going to be a bit more on modding. The topic that I've chosen to cover today is what are called ORBATS. That's a military term that stands for Order of Battle, which is just a fancy way of saying the inventory of military equipment that a country has. This is probably one of the easier elements to modify with Supreme Ruler, and a lot of what I'm going to show today would work with previous versions of Supreme Ruler. Although we've now added to the engine, maybe about a year ago, there was a new function to be able to output from while you're in game. That function is only in Supreme Ruler 2030 and the Galactic Ruler series. So let's get started into this. I'm going to be using my Steam install folder, so I need to browse to my local files. In preparation for this video, I've already made a new scenario, and if you're unfamiliar with any of that, you'll want to watch some of our previous videos, but I'll get you up to speed on what I did. In the scenario folder, I've created world 2028.scenario. This is a duplicate from world 2030. Inside the file, the only things I've changed so far were that I'm using a new save file. We're going to have a new cache file for our version. And I made a duplicate of the included regions just so that I could have a subfolder for the scenario and have a file in there. We'll probably be adding more to this as we look at the ORBATS. But other than that, right now, this is essentially a copy of 2030. It just says that it's set in 2028. The next thing I want to change is default regions. For today's video, I've already chosen the country that I want to use for this. 209 is the region of Gambia in Africa. I've chosen it because it has a very small starting military, so it's going to be pretty easy for us to see our changes and understand what's going on. So I've made that change. Trying to think of anything else. No, for now that's all I'm going to change. Close, save my changes. And then if we run the game, we'll just take a quick look at what Gambia starts with. Go to sandbox. I need to select my scenarios. There's my world 2028. Gambia is the default. Let's hit start. So because we had never run this before, there was no cache file. By hitting start, it forced it to create a cache. And that's fine. I can now look at the game, command department. They start with 3 deployed units, which is these 3 boats. And they start with 3 units in reserve. Like I said, a very small military. It's going to make it easy for us to work with. Let's take a minute to sort of reverse engineer how did they get these 6 units in their inventory. So I'm going to quit out to desktop. The .scenario file, of course, is the one that tells the game how to pull everything together. Let's take a look again in the world 2028.scenario. In the InfoSet 0x02 section. This section includes a few different files. Specifically, I'm looking at the extension of .oob. This is the files that it's calling in to know what military inventory to include. Now, there's 3 of them on this map, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. We're going to start with this w2023.oob. And it tells us this file is in maps ORBATS. Let's go take a look at it. Root folder, maps, ORBATS. And it says it was using w2023.oob. This is a plain text file. You can open it with any basic text editor. I'm going to open this up. You can see the comment is this is the starting ORBATS 2023 all countries. And you can see that it includes multiple different files. So there's no real data in this one. This file just points it to all the other files. Now we've chosen to name all of the subfiles for the regions that they go to. 209 is part of the list. So it's including this file. Let's actually dig a bit deeper, see what's in that file. I can go to the, actually I should mention, it tells us that the file I'm looking for is also inside a subfolder. Close that, go to the subfolder, 209. Again, this is stored in plain text. Now the formatting for this is a little bit hard to read because this is a comma separated file. It is intended to be viewed as a spreadsheet, I suppose. But again, the engine just reads it in. You can still look at it in plain text, and I can see that it has the ferret quantity 0.5. So this is going to give it 1 battalion, but at half strength. It also has this artillery piece and this engineer. That's those 3 land units. And if I scroll further down, it has the 3 naval units. Now, the file itself actually has a lot of data in here, but this is pretty much useless data because there are no quantities to some of these things. When we've done the research for the game, as you'd imagine, there's a lot of countries, there's a lot of information to pull together. I'll share a little bit of our approach for designing some of this. So this is what it looks like. It is a spreadsheet with lots of different worksheets. You can tell we've made one for just West Africa, and it has all sorts of different countries, including Gambia. And to do our research, we look up land, air, sea. We try and match that back up to the equipment file, entries for the numbers we've got. But I need to sort of explain that we, of course, use fixed quantities, and we work with battalions in our game. So when I look up a country like Gambia, and I see that, well, they own some ferrets, but they only own 8. That's not a full battalion. That's not even really a half battalion. But we still give them 1/2 battalion. That's going to work out to about 20 pieces. So we do get some inaccuracies in the total data just because we can only work in certain size quantities. And sometimes we get a country that has like 1 piece of a certain thing. That's not worth including. Sometimes we've made decisions to adjust quantities just for gameplay's sake, more than realism. And so we tend to design first on a spreadsheet like this, and then we use formulas to transfer this into the exact format that's used by the game. So here you can see this is what that text file was output from, that there's different data we store in here. We need the exact ID of the unit. Sometimes there's some fake numbers of stuff that we're still researching. The quantities, anything 0, of course, they're not going to get any. And we work on a spreadsheet first, and then we save it out. So that's what creates this ORBAT file. And it's a bit of a mess here because it's got design data included as well. But I could, if I wanted, clean this up. I could remove every line that doesn't have a quantity assigned. Give me a moment to do all that. And if I remove every line that doesn't have a quantity assigned, then it's similar to what we were seeing in game. We have 3 land units, 3 naval units. We can actually now see that all their land units are put in at half strength. Now, I don't want to modify this particular file because it's being used by the core game. We're going to make our own version. But this quantity number, if I simply change this to 100, Gambia, after recaching, would start with 100 engineering units. Let's abandon this file and actually make a file of our own. So I'll drop changes, and we're going to need 2 files that we're going to make our own .oob for additions, and then we'll make the separate file that has the additions. I think I want to keep this folder open for a moment and get a second folder open. Let me again manage, browse local. Scenario. I've created a new scenario. I'm going into the .scenario file. You can see that game has already put 3 of these OOB files in there, so what's one more? I'm going to copy this line, paste it back in, and I'm going to call this 2028.oob. It's going to be in the same... Actually, I don't even have to do that. This is when modding, we have a certain structure for folders and files that we suggest. Players don't actually have to respect a lot of those constraints. I could drop this entirely, and now this OOB file, it's going to look for it to be just in the root right here. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab the 2023.oob file, copy it here, rename it to match the name we just gave of 2028. And in here, I'm going to drop everything except the 209. Oops. Come on. And I'm going to call this 209_28, just to differentiate the files. Close, save. And now I need to, let me reopen, I need to make this file. I'm going to take from 2023 the 209 that already existed, copy it here. Now this file, I'm mostly going to empty it because we're going to make our own version here. I'll just keep one line just so I have the reference. Save and close this. Now I've brought these into the, I have to pay attention to my folder structure. I decided to do things a bit differently. So here I have to go into this .oob and tell it that it's just right there in that same folder. Okay, so a repeat of the steps I just did is in the dot scenario. I told it to include, oops, I had it open twice. Where's my dot scenario? There we go. So in the dot scenario, I've told it to include this file. Close, save my changes. That file we just called. Right now it's just calling one orbat. The reason I chose to do it still this way is that if you're really starting to mod, it's very likely that you're going to start adding a bunch of different regions. You might make a bunch of changes. So it's good to have this as an intermediary file. In theory, you could point directly to a comma-separated file from the dot scenario. We suggest this method to stay organized. Okay, so the dot scenario calls the OOB calls the CSV, and this is where we're going to manage our inventory. Just so we can test things, like I said, I'm going to do 10. Close, save my changes. Now we should be able to immediately push play. I'll have to recache because the ORBATs are baked into the cache file. Sandbox. I need to select 2028. I want to recache. Start. Cache is done. I pick my map and start. Now we see if I made any mistakes. It did not do what I wanted. I did not get the extra units. Hey, pause my recording and figure out what I did wrong. Okay, I found my error. And this is also a good chance for me to show a little bit of debugging practice. So we had tried to add the 10 units, but I didn't get them. So I go back, double check all my files and my file names. Dot scenario for 2028 includes the 2028.oob. That's going to be in the 2028 folder. 2028 OOB. When I open that, it's including the 209_28 CSV. And when I closed this file, I realized, oh, there's my mistake. I forgot to make this _28 to match the new name I'd created. And inside there, we've got the 10 engineers. All right, let's do this again. I'll rebuild the cache. Go to the scenario, find 2028, options, system, force recache. Start. I'll say OK. Now let's take a look. There we go. So now we have a whole bunch of extra combat engineers. We have modified Gambia's inventory. I want to play with this a little bit more. Let's take a look at the ORBAT file itself, the equipment file, and some of the stuff that you'd set up. Quit. So this file, this CSV file, now I'm actually going to open it with a spreadsheet. I feel like I should give a warning. I'm using Excel. However, Excel with these comma-separated files, it has a tendency to mess up some of the formatting. We tend to suggest OpenOffice or Google Sheets, but I'm going to work with it for right now. So opening the file, I want to get all my columns so I can read everything. So the first line is commented out. This is just trying to give you the headers for each of the columns. The second line needs to start with that ampersand ampersand OOB, so the game understands what data it's being given, and then the region ID. The fact that we have the name there, that's just for us as designers to be able to read it. It doesn't need to be there, as long as it's got the number. And in fact, you could, if I copy that, paste it somewhere else, you could give inventory to multiple countries in the same file. We found it's just easier to make one file per country. We've just found it simpler to track. I'm going to keep assuming we're going this way. So we can see here that the three main columns that get used are the ID for the unit, the quantity of the unit, and the name. Though in fact, the name isn't even required at all. The game is just going to read ID, quantity, ID, quantity. That's the basic that you need. So some people might be wondering, well, how do I find the unit I want? I'm going to jump into the asset manager for this. Let me minimize, find my tools, the 2030 content editor, launch. And we've had some other videos where I've talked about editing some of these files. I can't even remember if I've done the equipment file in any great depth. But you can import from your game folders. Oops, this is set to some of my development work. Hold that thought. File, import from this folder. So this is my Steam install. I need to go to Maps, Data, and find the default.unit file. Just a reminder that it does allow importing from Supreme Ruler Ultimate. NG, which stands for Next Gen, that's your 2030 equipment file. Just takes a moment to import. Now this is every unit in the game. Maybe we want to filter this. I'm going to right-click, filter for year. I want greater than 1990. Class, let's find some artillery. We're going to give Gambia a couple artillery pieces. And maybe I'm going to say that they've bought it from Russia. So region code, filter, R, will get me Russian equipment. I'm going to click this to sort by year. Actually, let me take this back to the 1980s, get a little more options. Actually, I want even one more piece of data here. Mobility. I want, oh, the move type's already there. Toad. Yeah, I want to right-click, filter to the move type. And I'm going to use Toad artillery from the Soviet Union. Okay, we'll take a 2A36. This is the unit ID, 4313. I'm going to go back into Excel. 4313. I'm going to give them 2 of these. I'm actually going to remove this engineering unit. I'm going to right-click, delete that line. So I'm giving them 2 more artillery pieces. Let's give them a tank. Russia won't be towed. It'll be, excuse me, it'll be tracked. T-72 is classic. 2410. 2410. Just one of those. And maybe we want to give them a patrol plane. I'm just going to remove that filter for move type. An AN-72. I'm going to copy that ID, paste it, give them one of these. So now 2 new artillery pieces, a tank, and a plane. I could simply save this out and they would have those units added to their inventory. I should have kept the game open for one of the things I want to talk about. Let's look at some of the other data that you're able to use. And if you're unclear what some of these values do, I will point you to the Gamepedia. I've talked about this in a few of the mods we talked about on the forums, that our Supreme Wiki has lots of data about how to mod. I'm currently on the page for the cheats, but let me duplicate this. There's a reason why I'm talking about cheats. I'll come back to that. And I want to search for ORBAT. We have a design document specifically about the ORBAT files. And that page, sorry, too many ads on that page. It outlines exactly what each of the variables do. And please note that it does say that some of these are unsupported. It actually stops here. Anything here in past, the game is not reading those at all. I'm going to just set those to a dark gray to remind us. The game doesn't even look at those. What the game will look at is it needs the ID. The next two columns, these are if you want to specify an XY location on the map. I'll show you in a minute how to do some of that. Location name, I haven't played with that much. I'm not sure if it would override the name of the location if you set a name into this. Quantity, I should point out, we already saw you can do 0.5, you can do 1.75. We have a design rule to only ever do, to never do less than 0.5. That is the minimum we will put in. And we try and not do increments of more than 0.25, 0.5, 0.75. We try and stick to those numbers. In theory, you could do 0.33. You'd just get weird sizes of units once you're into the game. Status, if we check on the Gamepedia page, tells us this is what allows us to set it as deployed or reserved or entrenched. You can pre-deploy it as having been entrenched. The reserve will only work if the location it's on can reserve that kind of unit. If you set an XY location and there isn't a reserve facility there, it will be forced to be deployed. Battalion number is that as you build stuff in the game, it'll assign it a numeric count of 1st battalion, 2nd battalion, 3rd battalion. You can override that. You can override things like the efficiency of the unit, the experience that the unit has. You might change the strength versus the max strength. I can tell you with our designs that a tank, a Russian tank, has a max strength of 32. I don't actually have to put this in. The game already knows this. But if I put it at 18 for strength with a max strength of 32, it will be placed damaged and will begin repairing automatically. I'm not going to use those right now. Days left, if you force it into reserve, let me check again. So that was status, reserve. So I set this as 1, and I set days left 10. Then it's going to be in production. It won't actually be completed. We used this often when we were doing 1936 or Cold War era, that at the start of our game, there might be a naval units in particular that have very long build times. Maybe there's an aircraft carrier with a 300-day build time that is supposed to be done in 20 days. So we added to the system to be able to put stuff as partially complete. And the last thing is facing allows you to manage the direction it's looking in. Now I've broadly explained these, but I'm going to have a better example of how these work after, because there's another feature that I mentioned about being able to select in the game and tell it to deploy to create a file for you. Okay, so I've made changes, given them 2 artillery piece, a tank, a plane. Let me file save and close this. Now, like I said, Excel sometimes messes up comma separated files. I do not want to proceed without first checking my file in something like Notepad. Okay, everything looks good. The thing to watch for with some of the files, the way Excel treats certain cells, is you might come into a file like this and find that it has suddenly put double quotes around these. That would totally break the file. Don't let it do that to you. I'll drop those changes. Let's run in the game one more time and rebuild. Why does it still think I'm running? Oh, because of the content editor. I was on the wrong tab. The game. Play. Now, as I mentioned before, the ORBATS are part of the cache, so I have to find the file and tell it to rebuild the cache. And say okay. Now let's find it again and launch it and give it a try. The 3 boats are still deployed, and as I mentioned, so those are deployed not because they were told to be deployed, but there's only a pier at this location. There's not a port, so Gambia has nowhere to put its boats in reserve. If I check here, so we have 7 units. We have the T-72 that we wanted to give them. We have the 2 A-36s we wanted to give them, and they now have an aircraft. So that's the basic version of building an ORBAT. The dot scenario specifies OOB that specifies the individual files. The individual files have IDs and quantities, and the game simply puts things into reserve. And if you did a larger country like the United States, it's going to scatter things around the various reserve locations so that you don't just have everything lumped in one place. But we started wanting to be able to pre-position stuff on map more than just grabbing those X, Y coordinates. I should show that first. Maybe I want this tank. I'm going to deploy it. I'm going to send it to this location. And I can make him drive over there. But maybe I wanted him to be there at the very start of the game. One way to do that would be in the ORBAT file to specify the XY location. If you go to the land department, it tells me that this spot on the map is 756349. I'm just going to Alt-Tab out and reopen this with Excel. I could put 756349 as the X and the Y value, and then it would simply be there deployed. The status, just a reminder from the Gamepedia page. So status 0 deployed, 1 reserve. Because I've set it here as a 1, it's going to try and reserve, but there's no reserve facility there. So even though I've put a 1, it's just going to deploy. So I'm going to remove that just for cleanliness. So this is one way to do it. I could specify the XY location, but I keep teasing this fact that we created a new function. Let me show what the function does. I'm going to minimize this, minimize this. I've deployed this tank over here. And then I'm going to also get that aircraft, add him to selection, tell him to fly over here. And let's move one of these artillery pieces into the city. So we've taken time to pre-position stuff, and you might have done this with lots of different stuff, and you don't want to have to look up all the XY locations. That's why on the Gamepedia page, I had the cheats page open. Cheats also includes output functions for the game. Sorry, I should have scrolled to the right section before I started this. Let me search for ORBAT. There it is, output functions. The one I'm going to show specifically, because I honestly haven't tested some of the other ones, is this one here, output OOB %X, where %X means the ID of the region you want. So if I come to the game and the console is accessible through Control-Shift-S, in the console, I'm going to type output OOB space 209 is the ID of Gambia. Hit enter. What that does is inside my game folder, if I navigate to maps, data, maps, ORBATS, and sort by date modified. It has written 2 files for me. The first file it wrote, if I double click and open, it looks like an ORBAT. In fact, let me, as opposed to opening it in Notepad, open this one with Excel. Oops, I think I misclicked there. Open with Excel. It is a full ORBAT of everything that is deployed. Note, it only spits out the deployed units, not the reserved units, because we needed it that way. We might change the function someday, but you can see you get the IDs. And as opposed to doing one type in quantity of 3, it has given 3 lines of the same thing. And the reason being that these could have been at different locations. You can set quantities, but if you're specifying a location, you probably have to do one at a time, or 1s and 2s perhaps. So it has the IDs, XY coordinates, it saw and kept a name. Everything is quantity 1 when using this function. It knows the status of reserved, deployed, or entrenched. Actually, it's gone status 2, which isn't actually documented here, is it? Oh, 2 entrenched. So yeah, the boats began entrenched because they were at the pier when they started. Battalion numbers. It's put those in. So you're going to have first boat, second boat, third boat. Not really necessary, but it tracks all this. Efficiency is going to be whatever their current efficiency was. We can see that their strength is equal to their maximum strength. And it's even set the facing. It knows which direction the unit is pointing, and it has kindly told us the name of the design and what name does it have right now. It just spits this out as extra data. So this is the first file, and this is an ORBAT that you could pre-deploy a whole bunch of stuff and then use this function to create that ORBAT of all your deployed units. Now, here's the interesting thing. Maybe you started with 100 units. You've deployed 60 of them, and you spit out this ORBAT, which will give you those 60 units. But those 60 units are still part of the list of 100. That's why this spits out a second file. I'm going to close this without changing my saving my changes. Let me close. I don't need this either right now. Where is it? The second file it gives you is just unit ID, quantity, name, so that you could go back to our root file. And this is what we have to do for a lot of the development we do. So I know now I should remove 3 boats from the root ORBAT because I can start using this ORBAT. Let me show you a bit of what that would look like. I'll walk through it. So these 2 files, I'm going to copy them. I'm going to go into scenario, the folder for my scenario. I'm going to paste both of these in here. And so this is going to be 209_28. We tend to use the letter D if it's the ORBAT of deployed units. And this one I'm actually going to delete in a minute because I'm just going to use it to know what I should remove. Did I not save? Where's my extra files? Oh, I've blown it away. What did I do? Oh, sorry. That's right. Some of the units that we've got here are units that were part of the original ORBAT. And this is where it gets a little tricky if you're reusing a mix of files from the core game and your own files. This might be a case where you'd want to copy the entire ORBAT folder from Maps ORBATs and make a new copy for yourself for your mod, because then you can just add and remove and delete and stuff. And by making your own copy of it, you don't contaminate the core files. So I can only partially show some of this because I can't remove the boats. They're not in this ORBAT. But this one does have this, the Kohler. So now I'm just, sorry, misclicking all over the place here. I'm going to remove that. And the artillery, I'm going to remove that. And, oh, this has got a formatting error when we output it. the first line, yeah, I'll have to see if we can fix that. So be careful that the first line, when it's setting the quantity count, and again, this doesn't go into the game, so it's not critical. But yeah, basically, I don't need this file at all. Yeah, I'm not even going to bother saving this. I'm going to go back here. This file simply goes away because this new file has our 3 boats. Yeah, in this case, actually, I think I'm going to take those boats out so that I don't suddenly have 6 boats. Close, save. Now I'm just going to update this .oob file to say use this file name. And I suppose if I wanted, here I keep thinking of things off the top of my head, copy this. I shouldn't have dumped that file. Keep this one to just give us 1 extra of the artillery piece. But I'm going to remove the X, remove the Y, remove its status, and quantity 2. So now they'll have 1 deployed artillery, 2 more in reserve. Close this and save it. Now I've got 2 files here, so I have to go back in here, copy this, oops, paste, and now we're using 2 of these files. Save. Just to wrap this up, I'll recache, we'll take a final look at it. Sandbox, scenarios, 2028, oops, system, force cache. Okay, so those units have been deployed exactly where we wanted them. And I have 2 more artillery pieces in reserve. That demonstrates how to add units to the game. The default is those text ORBATs that can be created by hand. You can use the format from copying existing. The Gamepedia tells you what each of the values means. And if you decide to start pre-placing, Control-Shift-S into the console, and you just output OOB for the region number that you want. In this case, I was 209, but you could look up any region and output that for them. Okay, that's ORBATS. Hopefully that gives you you guys a little bit more to play with. We've got a whole bunch more modding videos. If you've started with this one, I'd probably suggest find the playlist. Because I've done some of these in order, there's things I did today that I didn't explain. Hopefully I wasn't going too fast. Things like recaching, the .scenario file. If you still need more information on those, check the other videos. If there's a topic we haven't covered yet for modding that you'd like us to do, leave comments down below, like the video while you're there, and we'll try and make some more of these videos. Thanks for watching.